Thank you. I'll try and get us back on track with just a couple brief comments. It's a real honor to be here to introduce Herman Daly and also Brian Czech, who's accepting the award on Herman's behalf. I'd just like to share really one comment about how Herman and Brian's work was instrumental in shaping really the trajectory of my career. Really the point is their work, their courage, their leadership helped encourage me to challenge the overarching goal of pursuing ever more economic growth on a finite planet in any given country. My pursuit of critically thinking about that goal and challenging that led me to quit my career in accounting in California and move out here to DC last year to become a full-time planetary health activist and campaigner for a sustainable future. So owe a lot of thanks to Herman and Brian for that. Yeah, thank you. And really, I'd just like to lead with that. I mean, I'll share. Interestingly, I nominated both Herman and Brian for this award. So this is pretty special. And I'd just like to share what I included in Herman's nomination submission is just to share that I consider both Herman and Brian some of the giants whose shoulders we all stand on, certainly from my perspective. So thank you, Brian, and thank you, Herman, who couldn't be here with us. I'll turn it over to you, but thank you and congrats.
Oh, thank you, Rob, and thank you, Janine, for a really well-organized event. No, it really is, and it's important, I think, because a lot of the people that get these awards, they have their head down working a lot. That's probably why they get these kinds of awards, and a lot of times they don't take the time. I know Herman didn't take a lot of time to smell the roses and look behind and think of the accomplishments. So it's refreshing for this to happen, and it's actually very productive too for all of our efforts because it's encouraging, and everybody needs encouragement. So, an award ceremony like this is very encouraging, and I think it adds a little cachet to the body of work that goes along with the awardees, and that's also very helpful in our collective future endeavor. So thanks again, Rob and Janine and all the leaders and energy folks. May I have the slide clicker, please? Thank you. Okay. So I want to start by just giving a very quick summary. In steady state economics, we see the economy growing, as Rob mentioned, on a finite landmass, and that takes natural capital. So our stocks of natural capital are being depleted, and we have waste in the form of materials and waste heat. And this is about as simple of a schematic as we can get to show that throughput and economic growth. But with the technology we have now and the types of chemicals and with the sheer size of that economy, it's not just a little bit of throughput and growth. It's existential threats now, like climate change and plummeting biodiversity. So that's what we recognize when we say that, well, neither growth nor degrowth are sustainable, and that leaves the steady state economy as the sustainable alternative. Ideally, that steady state is equilibrating somewhere around an optimal level before too much has been lost to the processes of throughput and economic growth. And so that's the starting point conceptually for a lot of steady state economics. But now let's talk about Herman. We see him here at Louisiana. Yeah, probably a lot of people that are familiar with Herman never saw a photo anything like this. Here he is at Louisiana State University, transitioning from his PhD program to his first tenured track at LSU. And he didn't get there just as a matter of chance. He studied under Nicholas Georgescu-Reagan at Vanderbilt, and it was Georgescu that introduced Herman to the application of laws of thermodynamics to the macroeconomy. And I just want to relate the primary implications of those laws in lay terms. The first law tells us that you can't get something for nothing in terms of matter or energy. So right away, you have part of a cornerstone for recognizing limits to growth. Second law tells us that, well, you can never get 100% efficient. There will be waste. There must be waste. And all else equal, it is a function of the amount of that throughput and the amount of growth. So Georgescu was extremely important to Herman from the get-go, and his career was full of outstanding relationships with very prominent academics, and eventually with Robert Goodland at the World Bank, his great friend and colleague, and then the late Robert Goodland, I should say. And afterward, when Herman was at the University of Maryland, he maintained a very productive relationship for years with Bob Goodland. Now, Herman's leadership, you know what really stands out about it to those that know Herman, wasn't intentional. It clearly wasn't. It certainly wasn't plotted or planned. It came from great personal and professional integrity. What Herman analyzed and concluded, that's what he wrote. He didn't stop to think, well, how is this going to affect my funding of my program, or how difficult will this make things politically? He wrote what he found. And he was a sort of Renaissance man. He was like the old classical economists. He understood the history that came before him, and he was an expert on many topics related that were relevant to the economy, like the laws of thermodynamics. And he started his steady state economics upon a moral philosophy, a Christian philosophy in Herman's case, as all the great classical economists had some type of moral foundation. And you know, one of Herman's pet peeves was what he liked to call intellectual laziness. He can't stand the Twitter stuff, where people pipe off about things with a very shallow understanding many times of those things. Herman studied a lot, studied hard, and so, you know, his leadership comes from that. Early on, he was an interdisciplinary, big picture, long-term thinker, and you have to have that for sustainability purposes. It's not a matter of a bunch of different microeconomic scenarios. It's stuff in the aggregate. And finally, I want to say that Herman is a very modest fellow. And I think that what modesty does is it tells the observer, you know what, this person doesn't have some kind of hidden agenda. And that does build trust, which then begets friends and followers. That's why Herman's a leader. Just a quick sample of accomplishments. Herman authored many foundational articles and books. For the Common Good is probably the best known. He did have a stellar career, starting at LSU through the World Bank and ending up at the University of Maryland for probably about 15 years. And he was a co-founder of the International Society for Ecological Economics, as well as the journal Ecological Economics. He won many distinguished awards, including the National Council Science and Environment Lifetime Achievement Award. That's a pretty big one. But I can tell you he's also very proud now of this 4Gen Award for reasons we talked about before. And he's actually inspired an effort for a new Nobel Prize in Sustainable Economics. You can find it out there on the internet. You know, who knows where that'll go, but it's out there. And finally, he's actually the subject of a recent Festschrift, which is a book of tribute to a current scholar. And you know, and Herman is still active. He writes, for example, for our blog, the Steady State Herald, fairly regularly. So I would say Herman Daly's legacy is nothing short of a school of economic thought. We can call it the Dalyist school of economic thought. And hopefully everyone will explore that school of thought more going forward. I'll get to that in just a minute. As with the Fest trip, there's plenty of testimony to Daly's influence on their work. I want to mention the one that I'm most familiar with, which is myself. And, I was doing my PhD research in the 90s, and it was a policy analysis of the Endangered Species Act, which led me to identify the causes of species endangerment as a who's who of the American economy. So I start looking for literature using keywords like economic growth and wildlife conservation and biodiversity. I'm telling you, there was a lot of fruitless searching. And then finally I found the Daly literature on the steady state economy. And I was thrilled, intellectually thrilled. I remember to this day being at the library at the University of Arizona with the Sabio literature system. And it struck me very quickly that those were the most potent conservation policy implications I had ever seen. And that's actually a sentence from my second book, Shoveling Fuel for a Runaway Train. And then more recently, the Supply Shock book is a very Dalyist enterprise, and that's one of the door prizes, by the way. Finally, a bit about CASI. Well, we are the only organization in the world dedicated explicitly to advancing the steady state economy. I established CASI in 2003, and frankly, because I was prohibited from talking about the conflict between economic growth and environmental protection by my previous employer, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. There they go. Yeah, so I quit last year, and I'm full-time with CASI now. We're a 501c3 nonprofit, and we very much operate pursuant to a Dalyist vision. Herman's on our board, and our business model is sound science, deep scholarship, and reporting the truth as it's found in that scholarship. And of course, the truth that we do find is very inconvenient because it flows straight upstream in the river of political economy. So we do depend on a fair bit of volunteerism, and we have a position on economic growth that people can sign, and those signatures are a key tactic for a less favored by big money organization. So yeah, there was a slide about how we brought that position into scientific professional societies, and how Herman found that to be one of the most encouraging developments when we got those societies on board. So finally, what we want to do going forward with everybody here is to couple our steady state economics with renewable energy activism. Just yesterday on the phone, I was with Vera Cole, who's the president of the Mid-Atlantic Renewable Energy Association. And we both concluded something from our respective angles. Neither one of our efforts are quite complete for purposes of sustainability. But you take the two together, and you're pretty much all the way down to the goal line. So we want to work with the renewable energy folks much more going forward, and we hope it's vice versa as well. Please sign the CASI position on economic growth. You can find it at the website. It's back there on the table. Skylar Perkins, our projects director back here, will be floating around with it. So take a look at that. You'll be in outstanding company with the other 14,000 signatories to our position. And explore the Dalyist school of thought. And one last thing, I know Herman would want to say, I should have said this up front, congratulations to all the award winners here. You should be very proud of your accomplishments, and keep up the good work. Thank you.